The space station hung in the darkness like a metal flower. Its lights blinked slowly against the black sky filled with stars. Inside the main meeting room, two very different groups faced each other across a wide table. On one side stood the Kethmori warriors. They were tall creatures, much taller than any human. Their bodies were covered in hard, shiny shells that looked like armor made of bone. Forearms moved with careful grace from each powerful torso. Their eyes were large and dark, seeing everything. When they breathed, it made a soft clicking sound that filled the quiet room. Commander Zixara was the largest of them all. She stood 8 feet tall, her shell gleaming under the bright lights. Each of her forearms was thick with muscle. Scars marked her shell where old battles had left their marks. These scars told stories of victory. In 3,000 years, no warrior from any world had ever beaten a Kethmori fighter in single combat. On the other side of the table sat the humans. They looked so small next to the alien warriors. Their skin was soft and pink. They had only 2 arms each. Their bodies seemed fragile, like they might break if someone touched them too hard. But their eyes were bright and alert, watching everything with careful attention. Captain Sarah Chen sat in the middle of the human group. She was 50 years old, with gray hair tied back in a simple style. Her face showed lines from years of making hard decisions. She wore a blue uniform with simple metal badges that showed her rank. Next to the huge alien commander, she looked like a child sitting at the adult table. The meeting had been going on for 2 hours. The Kethmori wanted the humans to join their empire. They had made this same offer to hundreds of other species across the galaxy. Most had said yes right away. The Kethmori were strong, and their protection was valuable, but they also demanded total loyalty from those they protected. The humans had listened to the offer with polite attention. They had asked many questions about laws, trade rules, and freedom to govern themselves. The Kethmori had answered each question with growing impatience. These soft creatures were taking too long to see the obvious truth. Join the Empire or face the consequences. Finally, Commander Zixara stood up. All 4 of her arms moved in a pattern that meant dominance in her culture. The sound of her shell scraping against itself echoed in the quiet room. When she spoke, her voice was deep and rough, like rocks grinding together. "We have been patient with you, small humans. We have explained the benefits of joining our great empire. We have shown you the protection we offer. Yet still you delay with endless questions and discussions. This is not how strong species behave." Captain Chen leaned back in her chair. She had expected this moment would come. The Kethmori were not known for their patience with species they saw as weak. She kept her voice calm and steady when she replied, "Commander, we appreciate your offer, but joining an empire is a big decision. We need time to think about what is best for our people. We cannot make such choices quickly." Zixara's mandibles clicked together rapidly. This was a sound that meant anger or amusement. In this case, it was both. She had heard these same weak words from dozens of species before. They all said they needed time to think. They all tried to delay the inevitable moment when they would have to submit. Time to think. You speak as if you have a choice in this matter. Every species we have encountered has eventually joined our empire. Some joined willingly after seeing our strength. Others joined after we demonstrated that strength more clearly. The choice is simple. Join us now, or join us later after we have shown you why resistance is pointless. The other humans around the table shifted uncomfortably. They had hoped this meeting would go better, but they had also prepared for this possibility. Captain Chen stood up slowly. She was much shorter than the alien commander, but she did not look afraid. "Commander Zixara, if you insist that we must prove our worth, then we invoke the ancient right of trial by combat. This is a tradition that even your empire recognizes, is it not?" The alien warriors made surprised clicking sounds. They had not expected this. The trial by combat was indeed an old tradition that the Kethmori respected. Any species could challenge their right to rule through single combat. If the challenger won, their people would be left alone. If they lost, they would join the empire immediately with no further discussion. But no species had ever won such a trial. The Kethmori were simply too strong, too fast, and too skilled in battle. Their warriors trained from birth to fight. Their bodies were natural weapons covered in armor like shells. Their forearms could strike from multiple angles at once. The trial was really just a formal way for weak species to surrender with some dignity and tact. Zixara's mandibles spread wide in what passed for a smile among her people. This was unexpected but also amusing. She had fought in many trials over the years. Some opponents had been larger than humans. Some had natural weapons like claws or poison. Some had thick armor or incredible speed. All had fallen before her skill and strength. You wish to invoke the trial by combat? Very well. I accept your challenge, Captain Chen. The terms are simple. Single combat between chosen champions, fought with traditional weapons only. No armor except what the body provides naturally. The fight continues until one combatant yields or can no longer continue. Do you understand these terms? Captain Chen nodded. She had studied Kethmori traditions before this meeting. She knew exactly what she was agreeing to. Around the table, her fellow humans tried to hide their worry. They trusted their captain, but this seemed like an impossible challenge. I understand and accept these terms. When shall we hold this trial? Now, Zixara said without hesitation. Why wait? Your defeat will be quick, and then we can move on to more important matters. My ship has a suitable combat area. We can settle this within the hour. The meeting broke up as both groups prepared to move to the Kethmori vessel. As they walked through the corridors, Zixara felt confident and eager. She had fought creatures twice her size and won. She had faced opponents with natural weapons that could cut through metal. She had defeated champions from worlds where combat was a way of life. What could one small soft human possibly do against 3,000 years of Kethmori military tradition? This would be over quickly, and then her empire would have a new member species to serve and obey. It was just another day in the life of a Kethmori commander. But as they boarded the transport ship, Commander Zixara noticed something that made her pause for just a moment. Captain Chen walked with the steady confidence of someone who had faced danger many times before. There was no fear in her eyes, no nervousness in her movements. She acted like someone who knew exactly what they were doing. For the first time in many years, Zixara felt a tiny flutter of uncertainty, but she pushed it aside quickly. Confidence meant nothing in battle. Only strength and skill mattered, and in those areas no human could match a Kethmori warrior. The trial would begin soon, and with it another easy victory for the Empire. The cargo bay of the Kethmori warship was enormous. The ceiling stretched up 3 stories high, supported by thick metal beams. Bright lights hung down from above, casting sharp shadows across the empty floor. The walls were lined with viewing platforms where both crews could watch the trial safely. Kethmori warriors filled the upper platforms, their shells gleaming under the lights. They clicked and hummed to each other in their strange language, clearly excited about the coming battle. Many had never seen their commander fight before. This would be entertaining. The humans gathered on the lower platform, much quieter than their alien hosts. They spoke in whispers, their faces showing worry and hope mixed together. Some held recording devices to capture whatever was about to happen. Others simply watched their captain with trust and fear. In the center of the cargo bay, 2 weapon racks had been set up. The Kethmori rack held traditional blades from their homeworld. These weapons were works of art as much as tools of war. Each blade was perfectly balanced and sharp enough to cut through steel. The metal gleamed with an edge so fine it seemed to disappear when viewed from the side. Commander Zixara approached her weapon rack with ceremony. She moved slowly, letting all watchers see her confidence and grace. Her forearms gestured in patterns that told the story of her victories. She had won 37 single combats. She had defeated the champions of 15 different worlds. Her name was spoken with respect and fear across 3 star systems. She selected her favorite blade, a weapon that had been in her family for 6 generations. The handle was wrapped in leather from a creature that no longer existed. The blade itself was made from metal found only in the core of dead stars. When she lifted it, the weapon sang with a pure, clear note that filled the huge space. Captain Chen walked to the human weapon rack with much less ceremony. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had work to do. The human weapons looked simple compared to the alien blades. There were swords of various types, some clubs, a few axes, and other basic tools of combat. But Chen ignored all of these traditional weapons. Instead, she picked up something that made the watching Kethmori pause in confusion. It was a wooden bat, the kind used in an old human sport called baseball. The wood was dark with age and use. The handle showed wear marks from countless hands. Several small dents and scratches covered its surface. The alien warriors clicked and hummed more loudly now. Some sounded amused. Others seemed confused. What kind of weapon was this? It had no sharp edge. It had no point for stabbing. It was just a thick piece of wood. Had the human captain lost her mind from fear? Zixara looked at the wooden club with something between amusement and insult. Was this some kind of joke? Did the human think this was a game? The commander's mandibles clicked rapidly as she tried to understand what she was seeing. "Captain," she called across the open space. "That is your chosen weapon? A piece of wood?" Chen took a few practice swings with the bat, testing its weight and balance. The movements looked smooth and natural, like she had done this thousands of times before. "Yes, Commander, this is my weapon of choice." The two combatants moved to opposite sides of the marked fighting area. A Kethmori official explained the rules once more, though everyone already knew them. The fight would continue until one fighter yielded or could no longer continue. No outside interference was allowed. Honor and tradition demanded that both fighters give their best effort. When the signal was given, Zixara moved with the fluid grace of a born predator. Her forearms worked together in perfect coordination. The blade spun and danced through the air, creating patterns of light as it caught the overhead illumination. Her feet carried her forward with surprising speed for such a large creature. This was the traditional Kethmori fighting style, perfected over thousands of years. It was based on overwhelming the opponent with multiple attacks from different angles. While one hand held the primary weapon, the other three could block, grab, or strike. Few enemies could track so many moving parts at once. But Captain Chen did not fight the way Zixara expected. The human did not try to match the alien's speed or strength. Instead, she moved with careful purpose, always staying just out of reach of the singing blade. When Zixara attacked high, Chen was low. When the commander struck left, the captain was right. More confusing was how the human seemed to know where the attacks were coming before they arrived. Zixara would begin a complex combination, only to find her target had already moved away from where the strikes would land. It was as if the human could see a few seconds into the future. The watching Kethmori began to murmur with interest. Their commander was clearly the superior fighter in terms of raw skill and power, but somehow she was not able to land a solid hit on her opponent. The human moved with an economy of motion that was almost artistic in its efficiency. Zixara pressed her attack harder, using techniques that had never failed her before. She feinted with two arms while attacking with the third, keeping the fourth ready to block any counterattack. But Chen simply was not where the feint suggested she should be. The human seemed to ignore the fake attacks entirely and respond only to the real ones. For the first time in many years, the commander felt the sting of frustration. Her breathing became slightly heavier as she increased the pace of her assault. The blade moved faster, the combinations became more complex, and her footwork became more aggressive. Yet still the human danced away from every strike. Then something happened that shocked every Kethmori in the room. As Zixara committed to a particularly aggressive attack, Captain Chen stepped forward instead of back. The wooden bat moved in a simple, efficient arc that intercepted the alien blade just above the handle. The impact sent vibrations up through Zixara's arms, but more than that, the angle of the block forced her blade to twist in her grip. For just a moment, her perfect control wavered. In that instant, Chen struck again with the bat, not at the commander's body, but at her weapon hand. The blow was not hard enough to cause serious injury, but it was perfectly placed to hit a nerve cluster in the alien's wrist. Zixara's grip loosened involuntarily, and her precious blade flew across the room to clatter against the far wall. Silence filled the enormous cargo bay. Every Kethmori warrior stared in disbelief. Their commander, their champion, their undefeated leader had been disarmed by a human with a piece of wood. It seemed impossible. It had to be some kind of trick or accident. But Zixara knew better. As she looked at Captain Chen, who had already stepped back and resumed a ready position, the commander realized this was no accident. The human had planned that exact sequence. She had waited for the right moment, created the opportunity, and executed the disarming technique with surgical precision. The alien warrior still had 3 arms free, and her natural weapons were formidable even without a blade. But for the first time in her life, Zixara looked at an opponent with something approaching respect. This small, soft creature had just demonstrated something the commander had never encountered before. The human was not trying to overpower her or outfight her. Instead, Captain Chen was solving the problem of combat like it was a puzzle to be worked out. Every movement had a purpose. Every decision was based on careful observation and planning. This was not the wild swinging of a desperate fighter. This was the methodical approach of someone who had studied war as a science. Zixara flexed her 3 remaining arms and prepared to continue the fight. But now she approached with more caution. She had underestimated her opponent once. She would not make that mistake again. The trial was far from over, but already it had become something very different from what anyone had expected. The fight continued, but now everything had changed. Zixara moved more carefully, studying her opponent with new eyes. The easy confidence she had felt before was gone, replaced by the focused attention of a warrior who finally faced a real challenge. Without her blade, the commander relied on her natural weapons. Her shell was hard enough to stop most attacks. Her forearms could strike with crushing force. Her claws could tear through metal. She had won battles using nothing but these gifts her body provided. But Captain Chen continued to fight in ways that confused and frustrated the alien warrior. The human used the wooden bat not just as a club, but as a tool for controlling distance and timing. When Zixara tried to get close enough to grab or strike, the bat would tap her reaching arms just hard enough to spoil her balance. Each time the commander committed to an attack, she found herself slightly off target. A gentle push from the bat would redirect her momentum. A quick tap on her foot would change her stepping pattern. The human never tried to hurt her seriously, but instead worked to control how the fight developed. What disturbed Zixara most was how the human seemed to learn from every exchange. The first time the commander tried a particular combination of strikes, Chen barely managed to avoid them. But the second time the human was ready with a counter. The third time Chen actually used the attack pattern against its user. This was something the Kethemori had never encountered before. Their fighting style was based on perfection through repetition. Young warriors learned the traditional forms and practiced them until they became instinct. The techniques had been refined over thousands of years. They were supposed to be unbeatable. But humans, Zixara was beginning to realize, approached combat completely differently. Where her people valued the preservation of ancient knowledge, humans seemed to value adaptation and innovation. Captain Chen fought like someone who had never seen a rule book and did not care about traditional forms. The watching Kethemori began to understand what they were seeing. Their commander was not losing because she lacked skill or strength. She was losing because her opponent refused to fight the kind of battle she was prepared for. Every time Zixara applied a solution, the human changed the problem. Minutes passed and the commander found herself breathing harder. Kethemori were built for quick, decisive battles. Their powerful muscles could deliver tremendous force, but only for short periods. They were like sprint runners designed for speed and power rather than endurance. Captain Chen, on the other hand, showed no signs of tiring. Her breathing remained steady and controlled. Her movements stayed precise and economical. If anything, she seemed to be getting more confident as the fight went on, as if she was finally beginning to understand her opponent completely. This was when Zixara began to see the truth about humans. They were not built to be the strongest or the fastest. They were built to keep going when others would quit. They were persistence hunters who had once chased animals across entire continents, never stopping until their prey collapsed from exhaustion. The commander tried changing her strategy. Instead of complex combinations, she used simple, direct attacks. Instead of trying to overpower Chen, she attempted to outlast her. But the human adapted to these changes just as easily as she had adapted to everything else. When Zixara became more defensive, Chen became more aggressive, pressuring the alien warrior and forcing her to respond quickly. When the commander tried quick, simple strikes, the human used superior positioning to make each attack miss by the smallest possible margin. But the most unsettling thing was how Chen seemed to be reading her mind. Every time Zixara planned a move, the human was already preparing a counter. It was as if the captain could see the decision forming in the commander's thoughts and react before the action even began. What the alien warrior did not understand was that humans had spent millions of years learning to read each other. They were social creatures who survived by understanding the intentions of friends and enemies alike. Captain Chen was not reading minds. She was reading body language, breathing patterns, muscle tension, and tiny shifts in weight and balance. Every living creature telegraphed their intentions through unconscious signals. Kethemori warriors were taught to control these signals, but their training focused on fighting other Kethemori. They had never learned to hide their intentions from a species that had evolved to notice every detail of behavior and movement. The crowd of watching aliens had fallen silent. What had begun as entertainment had become something much more serious. They were witnessing their greatest warrior struggle against an opponent who should have been helpless. Some began to whisper that this was impossible. Others wondered if their commander was ill or holding back for some reason. But the humans on their platform watched with growing excitement and pride. They could see what their captain was doing, even if the aliens could not. Chen was not just winning a fight. She was demonstrating everything that made humans dangerous opponents despite their physical limitations. As the battle entered its second hour, Zixara felt something she had never experienced before: desperation. Her perfect techniques were being turned against her. Her superior strength was being made irrelevant. Her years of training and experience seemed to count for nothing against an opponent who refused to follow any rules. The commander made one final attempt to end the fight quickly. She gathered all her remaining strength and launched a coordinated attack with all four arms, striking from different angles at the same time. It was a move that had never failed to overwhelm an opponent, but Captain Chen had been waiting for exactly this moment. As the four arms converged on where she had been standing, the human was already moving. The wooden bat struck one arm just hard enough to change its angle. Chen's body twisted away from the second strike while her free hand pushed the third arm aside. The fourth arm, thrown off by the disruption of the others, missed entirely. Zixara found herself overextended and off balance, committed to an attack that had failed completely. In that moment of vulnerability, the human struck with the bat one more time. The blow caught the commander behind her leg, exactly where her shell was thinnest. It was not a hard strike, but it was perfectly placed to hit a nerve cluster that controlled balance. Zixara's leg buckled and the great warrior crashed to the floor of the cargo bay. The silence that followed was complete. 8 feet of armored alien warrior lay on the metal floor, breathing heavily and staring up at the lights. Above her stood a human half her size, holding a simple piece of wood, calm and ready to continue if necessary. For the first time in 3,000 years of galactic expansion, a Keth Mori champion had fallen in single combat, and she had fallen not to superior technology or overwhelming force, but to something much more disturbing: superior thinking. Commander Zixara lay on the cold metal floor, staring up at the bright lights that suddenly seemed too harsh for her eyes. Her breathing was heavy and painful. Every muscle in her body ached from the prolonged fight. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the shock of what had just happened. For the first time in her life, she had been defeated in single combat. Not by a larger opponent or one with better weapons. Not by a warrior from a species known for their fighting skills. She had been beaten by a human, a creature her people considered barely worth noticing. Captain Chen stood above her, the wooden bat resting easily in her hands. The human was breathing normally, as if the fight had been nothing more than light exercise. There was no arrogance in her expression, no triumph or gloating. She simply waited, ready to continue if necessary. "Do you yield, Commander?" Chen asked quietly. The question was respectful, without any mockery or cruelty. It was simply the formal request required by the trial rules. Zixara tried to push herself up from the floor. Her arms shook with the effort, and she realized that she truly could not continue. The human had not injured her seriously, but had somehow drained all the strength from her body. Every nerve cluster hit, every pressure point struck, every moment of overexertion had added up to complete exhaustion. "I yield," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth. She had never spoken them before. "I yield the trial to you, Captain Chen." The cargo bay erupted in confused sounds. Keth Mori warriors clicked and hummed in disbelief. Some demanded to know what trick had been used. Others suggested the trial should be declared invalid. A few wondered if their commander had been poisoned or somehow weakened before the fight. But the senior officers who had witnessed many trials before knew that everything had been fair and proper. They had seen their greatest warrior defeated in honest combat by an opponent who had followed all the ancient rules. The result was shocking, but it was also binding. Captain Chen set down her bat and extended a hand to help Zixara stand. The gesture surprised the alien commander. In Keth Mori culture, the defeated warrior was expected to acknowledge their failure alone. Offering help to a fallen opponent was not part of their tradition. The commander looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then slowly, she reached up and allowed the human to help her to her feet. Chen's grip was firm but gentle, supporting the larger alien without making her feel weak or helpless. "You fought with honor," Zixara said as she stood. The words were hard to speak, but they were true. "I have never faced an opponent like you." Chen nodded respectfully. You are a skilled warrior, Commander. I learned much from fighting you. The simple exchange seemed to calm the agitated Kethmori warriors. Their clicking and humming became quieter, more thoughtful. They watched as their commander and the human captain stood together in the center of the cargo bay, speaking with mutual respect. How? Zixara asked. How did you defeat me? I have studied every fighting style in the known galaxy. I have faced opponents from dozens of worlds. What technique did you use that I could not counter? Captain Chen considered the question carefully. I did not use any special technique, Commander. I simply fought the way humans fight. We adapt, we observe. We learn as we go. You fought perfectly according to your training, but I fought according to what the situation required. Your training, Zixara repeated slowly. Yes, I see now. My training prepared me to fight Kethmori enemies or enemies who fight like Kethmori. But you do not fight like anyone I have ever encountered. The alien commander began to understand something larger than just her personal defeat. For 3,000 years, the Kethmori had expanded across the galaxy by applying superior force and skill. They had met species after species, and their traditional methods had always proved adequate. But humans represented something genuinely new. They were not just another species with different weapons or tactics. They approached problems in fundamentally different ways. Where other species had predictable responses based on their evolution and culture, humans seemed to have no fixed patterns at all. Tell me about your people, Zixara said. I want to understand how you think, how you prepare for battle, how you solve problems. This knowledge may be more valuable than any conquest. Over the next hour, as medical teams checked both fighters and the crowd slowly dispersed, Captain Chen and Commander Zixara sat in a quiet corner of the cargo bay and talked. The human explained how her species had evolved as persistence hunters, chasing prey across vast distances until exhaustion made the kill possible. She described how humans had learned to make tools from whatever materials were available, how they had survived ice ages and droughts by adapting their behavior rather than their bodies. She explained how human societies rewarded innovation and problem-solving rather than rigid adherence to tradition. Most importantly, Chen talked about how humans approached warfare. They studied their enemies carefully, looking for weaknesses and patterns. They developed new tactics to counter every defense. They refused to accept that any position was unbeatable or any enemy was invincible. We do not fight to prove we are strong, the captain explained. We fight to win. If that means changing our methods, we change them. If it means using unusual weapons, we use them. If it means fighting in ways our enemies do not expect, that is what we do. Zixara listened with growing fascination and concern. She began to see that her people had been thinking about humans all wrong. The Kethmori had dismissed them as physically weak and therefore unimportant. But humans had turned physical weakness into strategic strength by developing their minds, instead of their bodies, a species that could defeat superior opponents through pure thinking was more dangerous than any enemy the Kethmori had ever faced. These creatures did not just fight battles. They fought wars. They fought campaigns. They fought with a perspective that spanned generations and considered possibilities that other species never imagined. Commander, one of Zixara's officers approached respectfully. What are your orders? Do we proceed with the conquest as planned? The commander looked at Captain Chen, who waited quietly for the alien's decision. The trial had been won fairly. According to the ancient laws, the humans had earned the right to be left alone, but Zixara was beginning to think that leaving them alone might be the worst possible choice for her empire. No, she said finally. We do not conquer these people, but we do not leave them alone either. Captain Chen, I have a different proposition for you and your species, one that I think will benefit both our peoples far more than conquest or independence ever could. 6 months later, the training facility aboard the Kethmori flagship looked very different than it had before. The traditional weapon racks still lined the walls, but now they shared space with equipment that would have seemed strange to any Kethmori warrior just half a year ago. Wooden bats, metal pipes, rope, nets, and dozens of other simple tools filled shelves where once only ceremonial blades had rested. Young Kethmori warriors practiced with these crude instruments, under the watchful eyes of human instructors who had been invited aboard the alien vessels. Commander Zixara stood in the center of the training floor, no longer wearing the elaborate armor of a traditional Kethmori champion. Instead, she wore simple practice clothing that allowed for greater freedom of movement. In her hands, she held a wooden staff, trying to master the flowing movements that Captain Chen had begun teaching her. The movements felt awkward and unnatural at first. Every instinct told her to rely on the precise, powerful techniques she had spent her life perfecting. But slowly, she was beginning to understand the human approach to combat. It was not about perfect form or overwhelming strength. It was about reading the situation and responding appropriately. "Remember," Captain Chen said from beside her, "you are not trying to force a solution. You are looking for the solution that already exists. Every opponent gives you information about how to defeat them. Your job is to pay attention and use what they tell you." Zixara nodded and tried the sequence again. This time, instead of focusing on her own movements, she watched her practice partner's reactions. She saw how her opponent leaned slightly before attacking, how his breathing changed when he prepared to defend, how his eyes telegraphed his intentions a split second before his body followed. The difference was remarkable. Instead of meeting force with force, she found herself redirecting her opponent's energy and using it against him. The wooden staff moved with her partner's attacks rather than against them, creating openings where none had existed before. "Excellent," Chen said with approval. "You are beginning to see the pattern. Combat is a conversation between two fighters. Most species only know how to shout. Humans have learned how to listen." Across the training floor, other Kethmori warriors worked with human teachers on different skills. Some learned how to use improvised weapons effectively. Others practiced the human art of reading body language and predicting opponent behavior. A few worked on endurance training, building the kind of stamina that allowed humans to outlast physically superior enemies. But the exchange of knowledge was not one-sided. Human soldiers and officers filled other sections of the ship, learning Kethmori techniques that had been perfected over thousands of years. They studied the aliens' methods of weapon maintenance, their understanding of battlefield positioning, and their sophisticated military organization. The partnership that had grown from that single combat trial was reshaping both species' understanding of warfare and cooperation. What had begun as a potential conquest had become the foundation for something entirely new in galactic history. Captain Chen had been promoted to admiral and now served as the primary human liaison to the Kethmori fleet. Her small wooden bat hung in a place of honor in her new quarters, mounted next to Commander Zixara's ancestral blade. The two weapons had become symbols of the alliance between their peoples. The benefits of cooperation had become obvious quickly. Kethmori's strength and discipline combined with human adaptability and innovation created military units that were more effective than either species could field alone. Joint exploration missions discovered new worlds and made contact with species that had avoided both humans and Kethmori when they operated separately. More importantly, the alliance changed how both species thought about their place in the galaxy. The Kethmori had always believed that strength was the ultimate measure of worth. But humans showed them that intelligence and adaptability could be just as powerful as physical capability. Humans, meanwhile, learned from Kethmori discipline and organization. Human crews that had once operated through informal cooperation and individual initiative found new effectiveness when they adopted alien methods of coordination and planning. "Commander," Zixara said during one of their regular training sessions, "I have been thinking about what you said during our trial, about humans fighting to win rather than fighting to prove strength. I believe my people have been fighting for the wrong reasons for a very long time." Admiral Chen set down her practice weapon and considered the alien's words. "What do you think the right reasons would be? To protect what matters, to build something better, to learn and grow. Fighting should be a tool for achieving important goals, not an end in itself. We Kethmori became so focused on being the best warriors that we forgot why warriors exist in the first place." The alliance between humans and Kethmori had attracted attention throughout the galaxy. Other species watched with interest and concern as two very different peoples found ways to complement each other's strengths while minimizing each other's weaknesses. Some alien civilizations had requested similar partnerships. Others had become more cautious about aggressive expansion, realizing that the galaxy now contained forces that could not be defeated through traditional methods. The balance of power was shifting in ways that no one had anticipated. But in the training halls and meeting rooms where humans and Kethmori worked together daily, the larger political implications seemed less important than the simple fact that cooperation worked better than conflict. Species that had been natural enemies were becoming natural allies. Admiral, one of Chen's staff officers, approached during a break in training. "We have received word from Earth. The Colonial Council has approved the formal treaty establishing the Human-Kethmori Alliance. The ceremony will take place next month on the neutral station where this all began." Chen smiled and looked over at Zixara, who was helping a young human soldier understand the proper stance for Kethmori blade work. The alien commander had changed greatly since their fight. She was still a formidable warrior, but now she was also a teacher, a diplomat, and a bridge between two very different worlds. "Commander," Chen called out, "it looks like we will have another ceremony to attend. I hope you are prepared for more speeches and formal occasions." Zixara's mandibles clicked in the pattern that Chen had learned indicated amusement. "As long as no one challenges me to another duel, I think I can manage. Though I must admit, losing that fight was the best thing that ever happened to me." The two leaders stood together, watching their people train and learn from each other. What had begun as a confrontation between species had become a partnership that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. The duel that was supposed to determine a winner and a loser had instead created something entirely new. In the end, both species had won. But more importantly, they had learned that winning was not always the most important goal. Sometimes the greatest victories came from discovering that your enemy could become your greatest ally, and that strength shared was more valuable than strength hoarded. The galaxy was a large and dangerous place, filled with challenges that no single species could face alone. But humans and Kethmori together had proven that cooperation could overcome any obstacle, and that understanding was the most powerful weapon of all. The alien warrior had requested a duel with a human, expecting an easy victory. Instead, she had discovered something far more valuable than conquest. She had found partnership, respect, and a new way of thinking about strength that would change both their peoples forever.